After discussing the various nature-based solutions, which I'm a big believer in, I'm going to include this piece not necessarily as an endorsement, but just as an alternate viewpoint from some concerned sections of the global community which think that the claim of nature-based solutions by some corporations as a way to reach their net zero targets are misleading and can be causing climate justice issues. So I will read the letter as is and show you the initial signatories to the letter. Then you can make your own mind about what you think. The net zero, of course, we have seen this in many ways before in various podcasts. So we are looking at the historical warming or global greenhouse gas emissions in gigaton CO2 equivalent per year. And then we are looking at where the current policies would take us if we didn't change anything. So the expected range of warming is to be the expected warming is going to be in the range of 2.7 to 3.1 degrees C. Pledges and targets will bring it down to 2.4. Optimistic net zero targets will bring it down to about 2 degrees. And then you need 2 degree consistent emission reductions that are down to here. To get to 1.5 degree consistent or 1.3 degrees, you basically have to go carbon negative at some point in the 2060s or 2070 time frame. The whole argument has been about whether we can get to any reasonable target without doing carbon drawdown of some form. And of course then the question is whether anything that exists right now is scalable at all. So we'll leave those alone and just focus on what we call nature-based solutions on land, managing forest, agriculture, coastal carbon. We looked at elephants and whales as potentially nature-based solutions as well, and so on. This particular group is advocating that we should just say no to nature-based solutions. So let's look at the driver of this group to say nature-based solutions are being misused as way to hide some of the problems. So here is a graphic that will look at climate targets of Fortune 500 companies. Some groups which are pro-business now say, wow, this is great. 1/5 of the global companies have now signed on to net zero targets and so on. And there are 3 types of commitments that have been made already over time. Climate target types, they are called, going carbon neutral when company completely offsets its greenhouse gas emissions. So it is not zeroing out its emission, it is emitting, but it's paying somebody to offset their emission by planting trees or doing things that are supposed to remove an equivalent amount of carbon dioxide somewhere else. Renewables, 100% achieved when a company relies on 100% renewable energy. And science-based targets, emissions are reduced in line with the need to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius by 2100 with a 67% probability. So in 29, the world's 500 largest companies employed 70 million people and generated 33 trillion in revenues. Given their size and influence, many of these companies have made commitments to reduce their carbon footprint. This timeline provides a holistic view when each company expects to achieve its stated target. So here is the source from where this comes. I hope I have the right no. Okay, never mind. So global coverage of national net zero emissions pledges. By early 2021, countries accounting for more than 70% of global carbon dioxide emissions had pledged to reach net zero emissions by mid-20th century. mid 21st century. The chart shows how much of the global GDP, population, and carbon dioxide emissions are covered by those pledges. As you know, COP26 is going on, and every country, especially a country like India, was under tremendous pressure to announce a net zero target, and India announced that it will go net zero by 2070, and there are few steps by which it promises to accomplish this. So this is the data as of the first quarter of 2021. Advanced economies with pledges, emerging and developing economies with pledges, and no pledges. So GDP wise, 36%, 34%, and 30%. CO2 emissions, 29%, 44%, and 29%. So that's advanced economies, emerging and developing economies, and no pledges. Population wise, 12% are covered, 28% in emerging and developing economies, and 60% are in the countries that have not pledged anything. This is from the IEA report on net zero by 2050. This is the chart of all Fortune Global 500 companies with formal climate targets. 163 are listed here, and they represent 23 countries. There are food companies, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Tyson Foods. There are pharmaceutical companies. There are energy companies. There are fossil fuel companies. There are shipping companies and reinsurance companies, and so on and so forth. Number of companies by country: 42 in the US, 3 in Canada, 11 in the UK. France has 18, Germany has 19, Japan has 13, and so on. And to read this, you basically are starting here in 2000 with company, the country and company listed across here, and you are going to 2012 for carbon neutral companies, 2017 for renewable energy commitments, and 2050 for science-based targets. So you can go and see which company has pledged what. What is the problem? The problem, according to this group that claims that we should say no to nature-based solutions, or dispossessions as they call it. Big climate polluters like Shell and Nestle are peddling a dangerous scam. They say they can they can bring their greenhouse gas emissions down to zero and keep burning fossil fuels, mine more of the planet, and increase industrial meat and dairy production. They call it reducing emissions to net zero. Planting trees, protecting forests, and tweaking industrial farming practices, they claim, will store enough extra carbon in plants and the soil to cancel out greenhouse gas emissions they pump into the atmosphere. Obviously, there are some valid points there. What corporations and big conservation groups call nature-based solution is a dangerous distraction. Their marketing concept is dressed up with unproven and flawed data and claim that the idea can provide 37% of reductions in CO2 by 2030. More and more corporations, from Total to Microsoft to Unilever, are making nature-based solutions the core of their climate action plans, while the conservation industry taps into corporate nature-based solutions funding to expand their control over forests. So there is an accusation here about conservation groups being called conservation industries and taking funding from these corporations aiming for net zero with nature-based solutions. Again, some truth. From conservation industry's perspective, the idea is simple. Corporations pay them to enclose forests or plant trees on land they claim is degraded and which could absorb more carbon if restored. In return, the corporations claim that the climate damage from their ongoing greenhouse gas emissions is going to be cancelled out. Often, a document referred to as a carbon credit is used to market this offsetting claim. So there have been issues with carbon trading before. Some solutions have been found. It's hardly a perfect solution, but other tools, market-based policies, or top-down legislative policies are being considered. So you have to explore more of these claims yourself. When corporations and big conservation groups talk about nature, they mean enclosed spaces devoid of people. They mean protected areas guarded by armed rangers, tree plantations, and large monoculture farms. Their nature is incompatible with the nature understood as territory, as a life space inseparable from cultures, food systems, and livelihoods of the communities who care for it and who see themselves as intrinsic part of it. What's more, behind a marketing front of genuine agroecology and natural regeneration initiatives, backers of nature-based solutions are preparing to advance yet more harmful practices such as monoculture, tree plantations, and industrial agriculture. Again, some truth to it, but you have to explore more on your own. Nature-based solutions are thus not a solution, they are a scam. Strong statement, but you have to separate who's cheating and who's honest, at least in intent. The purported solutions will result in nature-based dispossessions because they will enclose the remaining living spaces of indigenous peoples, peasants, and other forest-dependent communities, and reduce nature to a service provider for offsetting corporations' pollution and to protect the profits of those corporations most responsible for climate chaos. Indigenous peoples, peasants, and other forest-dependent communities whose territories are being enclosed will face more violence, more restrictions on their use of their lands, and more outside control over their territories. Okay, so again, scam is a strong word, so you have to decide for yourself based on your own research. But I'm raising this as an awareness that there is a large group which thinks this way. Nature-based solutions are a repeat of the failed REDD+, reduced emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. Whether this is a failure or not, you have to again do your literature search and find out. The REDD+ tree planting and forest conservation schemes that the same conservation groups have been promoting for the past 15 years. REDD+ has done nothing to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. This is true because we have seen that despite the 25 years of negotiations, emissions have not shown any slowing down. REDD+ has done nothing to rein in big food and agribusiness companies driving deforestation. Check again. Its enduring legacy, however, is the loss of lands and forests for peasants and forest-based communities and heavy restrictions on how they can use their land. REDD+ also has birthed an industry of sustainability and safeguards consultants and project proponents who profit from declaring REDD+ projects sustainable despite the violations of rights that such projects cause. The proponents of nature-based solutions are now utilizing the same tactics of certification schemes and safeguards to deflect criticism and to obscure their corporate takeover of community lands and forests. Check again. The companies with nature-based solutions in their climate action plans intend to increase their production of highly polluting products. In the flawed logic of corporate nature-based solutions, more pollution means that corporations will need to claim more land as their carbon storage facility. It will mean more dispossessions and more restrictions on peasant farming and community use of their territories. It will also mean even more corporate control over lands and forests. As an example, the Italian energy company Eni says by 2050 it will still be using fossil fuels to generate 90% of its energy. These kind of contradictions exist because even as Biden was announcing more renewables climate actions, he was calling for more oil production to continue economic development. To offset these emissions, it will have to claim the entire potential of all the forests in Italy to absorb carbon, 8 million hectares of Eni's net zero claim. According to the NGO Oxfam, the net zero targets of just 4 of the big oil and gas corporations, Shell, BP, Total, and Eni, alone could require an area of land twice the size of the UK. That is just a couple of the big energy companies. The net zero plan of the world's largest food company, Nestle, could require 4.4 million hectares of land per year for offsets. And the plans of big tech companies like Microsoft and Amazon are also based on enclosures of similarly large areas of land. Check again, but just make sure the numbers are correct and the claims are correct. Corporations and the large conservation NGOs are peddling this latest false corporate solutions, not just in the climate talks. They're also pushing the idea into governmental meetings of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. In connection with the Food System Summit in September 2021, nature-positive production is being used as a similar concept to nature-based solutions to further industrialize agriculture and expand corporate control. If these attempts are successful, the result will be more climate chaos and an even quicker loss of biodiversity, while corporations continue to profit from destruction and the burning of fossil carbon. Governments need to know that there is a growing movement of frontline communities, organizations, and activists for climate justice. The signatories of this statement will stand together to resist attempts to grab people's territories for nature-based dispossessions and carbon offsetting. Okay? We call on climate, environmental, and social justice movements to unequivocally reject nature-based solutions and all offset schemes. Such schemes are not designed to address the climate crisis. Their primary function is to buy another decade or two of unrestrained corporate profiteering from fossil carbon extraction and industrial agriculture while increasing outside control over community territories. Climate neutrality amounts to little more than paper reductions achieved through creative bookkeeping and unverifiable claims to have prevented hypothetical emissions. Time has run out for such distractions. Only a rapid time-bound plan to leaving the remaining coal, oil and gas reserves in the ground and industrial agriculture overhauled will avert catastrophic climate chaos. Okay, so there are other details here that I won't read, but you get the idea. There are, oops, I forgot to put in a list of signatories. Here is the list of signatories. Initial signatories: Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, Alianza Biodiversidad, ETC Group, Asian Peoples Movement on Debt and Development, and so on. So you can also check out each of these groups to see what their goals, aims, accomplishments, and general philosophies are, and then decide for yourself whether they do represent grassroots communities and climate justice. As I said, many of the points made are real, but the question for you will be to do the research and decide if you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of nature-based solutions, because I included whales and elephants in nature-based solutions. I presented papers which look at various ways to manage agriculture, forests, wetlands, coastal waters, and so on for nature-based solutions. I don't think all of them fit into the category of scams and so on, but verification, monitoring, and reporting is obviously important for any nature-based solution to ensure that carbon is being sequestered, additional carbon to offset. And in the end, the key question is whether offsetting as a whole is a good philosophy at all. In other words, can we keep on increasing emissions and hoping to take down more and more with various offsetting methods, including direct air capture and other carbon sequestration approaches, carbon utilization approaches? Or we should go to this so-called decarbonization, where we get out of the carbon trap and drive innovation towards eliminating carbon emission rather than increasing emission and then trying to take it down. So complicated, but nobody said this is going to be easy or straightforward. Nobody said this will protect all interests, so you have to decide where you stand on these things and whether you agree as a whole about whether nature-based solutions are actually part of the solutions, or they are actually nature-based dispossessions as claimed by this letter and this group. Okay, that's up to you. I will leave it here.